Hi everyone, I'm Ludum Taters. You can call me Taters. This video is part 1 of what will be an ongoing Power Index miniseries, the Monsters of MCOC, a perusal of the ghoulish, the ghastly, the grotesque. We're kicking things off with a look at 2 characters, the colossal undeads, Immortals Abomination and Hulk, released together this past November. Before we get started, one very minor tweak to the score parameters for one of the tiers. I'll explain why, and we've got 2 score adjustments too. The minimum score requirement for Tier 7 was previously 6.89, chosen somewhat arbitrarily based on a score range I calculated would represent a fair portion of the champs that would score near that cutoff. But as you can see, my calculation was a tad askew, with Tier 6 almost empty and Tier 7 growing by the episode. So Tier 7 will now require a 7.0 as its baseline, and Tier 6 will expand to include scores up to 6.99. This means Ghost Rider, a 6.95, has been moved to the top of Tier 6. On to the score adjustments. First, I gave Silver Surfer a 2 in utility in the Ghost Riders episode, but as dozens of commenters pointed out, that score betrayed the breadth of his abilities. I didn't account for his heavy phase, vigilance, or unblockable buff in that score, nor his full resistance to cold snap, incinerate, and shock. Better than immunity, as it allows him to heal from willpower when afflicted by them. Because of how niche the resistances are, they don't factor into his sustainability, like Magneto's resistance to bleed and Immortal Abomination's to poison, and by themselves aren't worth their own point in utility, nor is vigilance. But combined with his phase and unblockable, he gets upgraded to a 3 in this category, which improves his total score to a 5.78. Still Tier 4, but at the top of the tier. And then the original Black Widow, a champ I awarded a 7 in practical DPS way back in the Nick Fury episode. At that time, the series had only evaluated half the characters it has by now, and while her attack, crit rate, and crit damage stats, incorporating the boost she gets on special activations, are fantastic, she falls in the Kamala Khan category of champs with strong DPS potential, but no secondary damage effects such as additional burst or damage over time. She's dropping to a 6 here, aligning herself with other single-source heavy hitters like the Iron Fists, OG Spider-Man, and the aforementioned Kamala. As a basic rule of thumb, 6 is going to be the ceiling for hard slappers without any DOT, secondary damage, permacrit, or true damage capabilities. Her new overall score is 5.63, down from Tier 5 to Tier 4, average. The immortal versions of Abomination and Hulk are pretty gnarly. This Abomination used to be a soldier named Reggie 14, who served under General Ross to track the Hulk. Instead, after he thought he witnessed Ross's murder by Red Hulk, unaware that Ross is Red Hulk, he became obsessed with avenging Ross, contracting the construction of an aircraft to track Red Hulk and a mech suit called the Redeemer Armor to fight him. He became the chief officer of the US military's Hulk operations, where he studied the gamma-mutated carcass of the Abomination in an attempt to create a bio-armor with which he could finally kill Red Hulk. But when he made contact, the corpse encased him and transformed him into Immortal Abomination. As for Immortal Hulk, Bruce Banner is shot and killed during a gas station robbery, and Hulk arises from Banner's cocoon, untethered from his puny human counterpart. All rage, no conscience. By this point, most of you are aware that iBOM is a good champ, or know a player who thinks so. But what makes him good? And how good is he? We'll get to the second question, of course, but to start to unpack the first question, Brian Grant, the Bean God, who worked with Kabam on iBOM's kit design, explains what he envisioned for the character.
I sure do love me some taters. I mean, iBOM, right. For years now, poison has been used as an alternate source of damage that slightly reduces healing. But what if it did more? The goal with iBOM was to explore that idea. iBOM bathes the entire battlefield in poison. And of course, iBOM, being the poisonous monstrosity that he is, uses the poison to increase his own survivability while fueling his toxic aura to inflict poison upon anyone standing near.
The first stat is practical DPS. For my definitions of each stat, reference the description box. And a reminder that all scoring ignores synergies and other teammate effects, and assumes a character of max sig level. Starting with the basics, Abomination's attack is great. It's 8th overall and 4.5% lower than 4th place. His crit chance and damage are abysmal, but because his physical damage is only a small portion of his total DPS, this can be viewed as a positive. Champs like Guardian, Guillotine 2099, and Crossbones are more valuable because of their inability to crit, not less, making them great options for tricky defenders and nodes, such as Mr. Sinister and Spiked Armor. And where those champs gain back the lost damage immediately through secondary sources like Degeneration and Shock, iBOM has one of the highest secondary damage potentials in MCOC through his poison debuffs and his acid burn passive. What was it that Bean Man said about that?
I sure do love me some taters.
Oh, Brian. No, the other part?
iBOM bathes the entire battlefield in poison, fueling his toxic aura to inflict poison upon anyone standing near.
iBOM inflicts poisons on his opponent at a 15% chance per contact, by blocking, hitting, or hitting into block. Each poison lasts 25 seconds, and while its damage is barely over 100 per second, it stacks indefinitely. Upon reaching 10 stacks, it's automatically converted into an acid burn passive, to which no champion in the contest is immune, which deals direct damage equal to 550% of his attack rating over 5 seconds, and during which all of iBOM's attacks are unblockable and burst an extra 2,000 physical damage. In the span of 1 second with Acid Burn active, including 3 non-critical hits, iBOM's damage tops 20,000, without masteries or synergies. If that was the extent of his offense, he'd make for a pretty good attacker in my opinion. Easy, albeit slow ramp up, with a nice, albeit quick, payoff. But we haven't spoken about his toxic aura yet, and it's a mechanic that spews septic goo upon that downtime between acid burns. With his SP2, Abomination triggers a toxic aura passive for 10 seconds, which shrouds him in a corrosive haze that inflicts 1 poison debuff on a nearby opponent per second. These poisons are 2.5 times more potent than his natural poisons from contact, and every 2 seconds, one of his self-poisons is consumed to pause the aura. He can stack up to 4 auras, and with each successive stack, he inflicts nearby opponents 25% faster, allowing him to recycle acid burns at a drastically expedited rate. His SP3 automatically inflicts acid burn, a nice workaround against poison immune enemies, and each active toxic aura adds another burn. A defender with 4 acid burns is susceptible to upwards of 80,000 damage in 1 second. iBOM scores an 8 out of 10 in practical DPS. Quick side note, Immortal Abomination's SIG ability gives him 3 self-poisons to start each fight and extends his poison, petrify, and acid burn effects by up to 30%. As the proud owner of an unawakened rank 3 6-star version, I can say he doesn't need his SIG ability to be really strong, but without it, he'd score a 7 in this category. On to sustainability. iBOM's health pool is tied for 28th out of 174 playable 6-star champs. It's 23% lower than Sasquatch's top pool, but 37% higher than Rocket's game low. It's above average. His block proficiency is poor, but frankly it doesn't matter because the poisons. Bottle of boop, Bean Man.
iBOM uses the poison to increase his own survivability.
Each self-poison grants 190 physical resistance. At a max stack of 12 poisons, that's 2200 extra resistance. 2/3 the value of a max SIG Red Hulk's resistance at 10 heat charges, and twice as strong as Doom's crit resistance, for context. Furthermore, Abomination is 100% resistant to poison damage. And because poisons are 50% less effective at mitigating healing against him, with the willpower and recovery masteries at level 3, his health gains are constant and significant. With his health pool, escalating physical resistance, poison invulnerability, and willpower healing potential, he scores a beefy 9 in sustainability. He gets a 0 in power control, and before you shout about his petrify mechanic, that only applies to power gain buffs, not combat power rate, has only moderate potency, and falls into the utility category anyway. And speaking of, at first glance, iBOM's utilities appear to be both scant and mild. He inflicts a petrify with his SP1, whose potency is only 20% and doesn't stack. And though he can inflict weakness debuffs, they're weakness debuffs. Admittedly, not a debuff that's had much importance in the game to this point. But his petrify lasts over 32 seconds at max SIG, allowing the player ample time to work in other special attacks before needing to refresh it in matchups where it's most valuable, such as against Dr. Doom to prevent his Aura of Hazareth, and his acid burns instantly inflict a separate 5-second petrify that's 3 times more powerful. Acid burn makes his attacks fully unblockable, which serves aggressive playstyles as well as allowing the player a window of escape if trapped in their corner, and unlike unblockable buffs, acid burn cannot be prevented, bypassed, stopped, or sped up. Finally, his weaknesses are applied on every blocked hit as long as he's poisoned, they reduce enemy attack rating by a girthy 30%, and they stack. Their duration is only 2 seconds, but with smart and nuanced play, such as performing a block parry or block reparry, before a power gaining defender reaches an SP3, reducing attack by 60%, his tankiness inches even higher. It's also by miles the easiest application in the game, which makes him the best champion for the pesky What's Yours Is Mine node found in Alliance Quest and solo content. 3 out of 5 in utility. Champs with poison immunity generally gain 2 points in Suicide's compatibility, but instead of immunity, he's fully resistant naturally. As Brian said, iBOM bathes himself in poison, allowing non-stop willpower healing and strengthening his resistance to physical damage. With 5 poisons and 3 points in the recovery mastery, and factoring in the 15% life gain mitigation per poison, iBOM will heal over 550 health per tick through max willpower, 1.25% of his total health, a quarter of the value of level 1 recoil damage. Abomination gets a 4 here. There's a lot to like about Immortal Abomination, but what struck me first was how simple he is to play. Block, combo, throw your SP2, then you recycle your SP1s to self-inflict poisons and extend your toxic aura, or for longer fights you can stack auras with multiple SP2s and go for his peak DPS with an SP3. You don't have to combo count, reorder your strikes, heavy interrupt, or worry about buff order or activation. You just play and he does the rest automatically. 4 points in playability, a notch below the beginner-friendly characters because of the aforementioned nuance he warrants if you're gunning for the 5-digit secondary damage. iBOM's overall tally is a gobsmacking 8.13. Second in the science class behind Quake, and tying him with Cosmic Ghost Rider for highest among 2020 champs. He lands in Tier 8, keeper of only 14 characters as of this episode's release. iHULK is more complicated, and I say that with a sigh of disappointment. His attack rating splits the contest's average and iBOM's, but like iBOM, it's not the primary source of his damage output. On mediums, SP1s, and SP2s, iHULK gains stacking rage charges. Each stack deals the opponent an additive burst of 475 physical damage, 15% of his base attack. Their count can be doubled on heavies, they max at 25, and all stacks are lost completely if 2 seconds pass between rage hits. Similar to Rogue's buff copy mechanic, but roided by fuming green hatred. At 25 stacks, a medium attack would top 15,000 damage with 0 masteries and excluding crits. His attack rating slowly climbs relative to how much health he's lost in a fight, up to double his native rating, and the last hit of his heavy gets an attack boost equal to 40% of his base value per rage stack, to a max of just below 35,000. These are big numbers, and by God, or the one above all, iHULK can be savagely destructive. But if Power Index ignored the practical element of the DPS category, the scale would look a lot different and be unfairly misleading. The bottom line is that it's difficult to maximize iHULK's damage. It can be lost in an instant with one mistake or timing miscalculation, and the playstyle required to build and maintain it is not an advisable one for reliable alliance competition or efficient content clearing. His DPS score settles at a 7. Every rage attack siphons away a chunk of iHULK's own massive starting health, at a 14% higher cost than the damage it does to his opponent, and what he loses is converted into gamma radiation charges. He also gains gamma from a fraction of the damage he suffers from taking hits, and gets bonus gamma if under the effect of degen. Upon the would-be killing strike, he consumes gamma to go passively immortal and unblockable for 8 seconds, after which immortality goes on cooldown for 50 seconds, and he gains a surge of regeneration based on his gamma count. If you're following, he kills himself by using the same attacks that allow him to escalate his damage. For 8 seconds upon knockout is unkillable and regains a portion of his health back, but then continues to kill himself by attacking and can't escape death again for 50 seconds. To survive for long quests, you need to really ramp up your gamma to ensure the regen it produces when you hit 0 health is enough to keep you alive during Immortality's cooldown, and you can fairly easily get caught in a no man's land where you've expended your gamma for regen, but are still knocking on death's green door because of, say, a damage over time effect, and thus have to adjust your combos to avoid medium attacks altogether. It's just not ideal, and frankly not something players should have to be conscious of when they're just trying to smash things. Skilled players can manage this, but the margin for mishap is minuscule, and paired with the aggressiveness he's meant to be played with to capitalize on his offense, his sustainability is extremely fragile. He lands a 3 in this category, belying his undying moniker. Hulk gets a frail 1 in power control for his ability to suppress his foe's combat power with his SP2, at a 5% power reduction per rage stack up to 70% at max rage. This is paired with his ability to tank an SP3 while immortal, which alone wouldn't warrant anything because the window is too thin. With his SP3, he inflicts a 25% petrify for 20 seconds, a dramatically less impressive application compared to iBOMs, and his unblockable state when immortal can't be prevented. Together, those are worth a point in utility. He gets a strong 3 in Suicide's compatibility for his poison immunity, immunity to death by recoil, and because he's purging health throughout a fight regardless, compiling gamma from self-injuring masteries. His playability score, which as a reminder aims to quantify how challenging it is to operate a champ as he or she was designed to be operated, is also a 3 because of the alertness and aggression required to see his potential without making him mortal. iHULK's power total is 5.39, imprisoned in the below place of tier 4. Thank you for watching, and if you've been a fan of this series, I hope these smaller champ breakdowns are just as enjoyable for you as the longer ones were. The briefer entries are considerably easier for me to make, and I'd like to get back to posting multiple episodes each month. If this is your first episode and you enjoyed it, I've linked the full playlist in the description. Please like the video, comment with your thoughts, share with your mates, and subscribe to the channel if you'd rather have iBOM's power index score than iHULK's. Lastly, and please forgive me, Father, for I've no shame, if you're an impatient obsessive like I am and you want immediate full access to the power index scores of all characters in MCOC, updated through this month, you can get it by becoming a channel member at the lowest monetary level. It's only $5. Essentially, you'd be sponsoring me, but instead of a virtual high five, you get information. And a virtual high five if you want. Slap. More details about that in the description as well. I'll see you guys in the next episode.